Welcome back to Meet and Greet. Welcome back. I can't even contain myself. Today is a very special day. This might be the most important video probably in my entire channel. Today we are making a craft artisanal smoked brisket. And there's no better way to kick off the summer than to throw a brisket on the pit, roll it low and slow for 12 hours. And I'm gonna show you every single tip, trick, technique that I have in the book to guarantee a fail-proof brisket for you and your family. So, hey guys, look, follow along, sit down, crack a cold one, cut, light a cigar, whatever you need to do to relax, and I will not hold anything back in this video in an effort to teach you what I wish I would have learned a long time ago when I started brisket. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, guys. Let's do it. Now, of course, I trimmed this brisket last night. This was about a 16-pound brisket. This thing's probably weighing in net weight somewhere around 12 pounds, 12 to 13 pounds. That tells me we're gonna at least be in this cook for about 12 hours. If you're wondering how I trim this brisket, I recorded a how to trim a brisket video. And after you're done watching this one, jump over there. We're in no rush. Before we start this video, let me make this disclaimer, and I'm gonna say it from the bottom of my heart. If you follow every step that I map out in this video to the best of your ability, I will guarantee you that you will not go wrong on this brisket. I know briskets seem daunting. I know they're expensive and they're big cuts of meat, but I promise you, there's just a couple core competencies that we'll talk about in this video. And if you can check those off, you will produce a high quality brisket. I promise you. Let's talk binders. I want to talk about a binder because to me, it is incredibly important. I've heard and seen people kind of graze over a binder. They don't really touch on it. They say you can use it, you cannot use it, and there's all kinds of concoctions for a binder. For other cuts of barbecue, I'm not so worried about it. For brisket, it's very important to me. For me, I believe, again, my opinion based on my experience, is you'll produce a better product if you use a binder. Now today, we have yellow mustard. We've all seen yellow mustard. My preferred binder is 50-50 yellow mustard and pickle juice. This will do just fine. Now, as you're applying your binder, the biggest mistake that I see is folks tend to overuse the binder. They put a big glob of mustard or whatever said binder is. It's just not necessary. I'll show you the exact amount you have to use. You don't need to use any more than that. The purpose of the binder. What the binder does is it allows the coarse seasonings that we're going to lay on top of this brisket to hit and stick. The binder will grab and latch itself onto that rub, and you get a better coating that way. Let's talk pepper real quick. Not all peppers created equal. You actually, when you're making brisket, when you're making a craft brisket, you actually don't totally want the most flavorful, sharpest, spiciest pepper. I know in Texas barbecue, specifically Central Texas barbecue, a lot of pepper is utilized, but really what you want is a coarse black pepper that has a little bit of age on it, meaning it's not as sharp as you would think it needs to be. And the reason why I like that is because I can use more pepper without making my briskets too hot, meaning too spicy. So I get more usage out of my pepper, which ultimately translates into my bark. So something that I like to do is I'll get a 16 mesh ground black pepper, and I'll get a couple bottles, and I'll pop the, I'll open it up and I'll pour it out on a plate, and I'll leave it in the fridge for a few days, or I'll leave it out on a countertop for a few days. I'll try it, see how spicy it is, and just give it a couple more days if it needs some more time. But this pepper here, I've had this pepper for a fairly long time, and this is far less spicy, less hot than the pepper that you get out of the store. So I like to let my peppers kind of ease themselves out, and then I can use a good bit of it without worrying about making my brisket too spicy or too hot. Kosher salt. This is kosher salt. There you could get Diamond Crystal coarse salt. I use kosher just because I'm used I'm used to it. I know the sodium, I know the taste, I'm just used to using it. And then lastly, I'm gonna try not to do a backflip. I'm gonna try not to do a backflip. And I'm gonna try not to smile so hard that my ears fall off. But this is Brisket Booster. I made this. This is my own rub. Pretty cool. What's Brisket Booster? Great question, friend. For many years, as I endeavored to make craft brisket, and I know craft is kind of overused, but truly, like a brisket that you pour your heart and soul into, a brisket that you babied and you took time with and you care about and you want the flavors to be spot on. That's craft brisket to me. And as I endeavored to make more artisanal food, more artisanal barbecue, some years ago I had the idea, I was like, man, it'd be super cool. I told my wife, I said, babe, it'd be super cool if I can make my own. And so my wife and I have spent the last 2 years working on crafting this rub. And I'm not gonna make this video about this rub. The only reason why I'm going in detail about it is because this is a supplement to brisket. Is it required? No. Do you have to buy it? Of course not. This, though, for me, I made specifically to achieve the color and the flavor profile that I'm looking for in a brisket. And boy, did I hit the nail on the head. So if you're curious, links in the description. Feel free to get Brisket Booster. But by no means am I convincing you to do it. Use anything you want, guys. It's barbecue. Put the whole kitchen cabinet on top of your brisket if you want. Enough talk. Let's jump into it. Pepper. This is what I do. I broke open my pepper. I like to do that. My salt, I did not. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like after. Now, you could get it gets real hectic, real quick, if you're not paying attention. And again, like I say in all my videos, you're not seasoning high enough if you're not seasoning the floor that's beneath your feet. So you gotta go high, boys. You gotta aim high to get where you wanna go. And where we wanna go is full, total, and complete coverage. If I ever see you seasoning your brisket anywhere below your hairline, for the folks of us that have hairlines, or below the crown of your bald head, you're wrong. So take her high, okay? Now, we're up here, we're seasoning high, we're letting the air hit the granules. And when we're high enough, gravity and the air spreads it out and we get total coverage. And here's really where the binder comes into play. I got such good coverage with my pepper that, in my opinion, from my experience, if the binder wasn't there, I'd drop this salt on it and the salt would really just bounce off. It's not tacky enough to grab onto it. So that binder underneath is really gonna give us the stick that we need. Again, I am at or above my hairline, and I am seasoning everything that is around me with mass collateral damage. It's the only way to do it. I go once over, I pat it back in, and I'm gonna bring her back. A little heavier on the way back. My goodness, this is beautiful. Salt, pepper, Brisket Booster. The way that I utilize the Brisket Booster, I dialed this rub in to not be super heavy on the sodium. This has less sodium on paper than a Lowry's, for example. So if you've tasted Lowry's, from your screen right now, you know that this is slightly less saltier than Lowry's, but it's equally as robust. This allows us to really use as much as we want to within reason. The way that I do the bottom section with my Brisket Booster is I just send a nice little coat, just a tiny coat on the bottom. The top is where I give most of the love. Just a nice tiny coat. Oh, smells like love. That's what that smells like. Behold. Now's where it gets fun for me. I love the top side of a brisket. Nothing better than making the top of a brisket look like art. Binder, pepper. I'm going pretty heavy on top with my pepper. One down, just go back a little bit. Spot check. there's any spot you missed, give it back. My goodness, that looks great. Oh, and best believe that every single ounce of this table is covered in salt and pepper. Salt, same deal. Back again. Brisket booster. And with the brisket booster on top, I go heavier than I did on the bottom. I'm giving this the color that I want. I'm making sure that I'm getting total coverage, and it's just great. And that'll do it. That will do it. The last thing I'll say in regards to seasoning is it's possible, yes, it's possible to use too much pepper. Of course, it's possible to oversalt. If you use too much pepper, what you'll find is on the pit, your brisket will start to clump up, and then it'll actually start to flake the bark off. It's not even bark. The pepper and the salt will congeal with the humidity, and the salt will actually attract the ambient humidity, and it'll clump up with the pepper, and then you'll start losing your bark. That is a DEFCON 5 barbecue scenario. That is worst case scenario. So as a overall theme with seasoning, for me personally, less is more. It's really easy for us, especially us barbecue dudes, to just overdo everything. Overdo the tallow, overdo the wrapping, overdo the smoke flavor. It's just easy to overdo. When it comes to seasoning your brisket, if you're endeavoring to make a craft brisket, just go a little lighter on the pepper, go a little lighter on the salt, go a little lighter on a brisket booster or something like that. And what you'll find is your crowd will be happier. You will be more pleased if you have a beautiful brisket with the bark set, and maybe it's just missing a little bit of salt. That's okay. We can live with that. What we can't live with is a brisket that sucks the moisture out of your tongue when you eat it because we decided to overdo this. Have I drilled that point in enough? I think so. Both briskets have been perfectly seasoned. Now it's time to get them on the pit. And as a broad overview today, I plan on running these briskets for 12 to 15 hours. Again, I'll be utilizing my 500-gallon offset smoker. By no means do you obviously have to use a 500-gallon. You can use any barbecue smoking apparatus that you have. I use my 500 because really it's just easier to film with the bad boy, and I worked hard to build it, and it's cool. So I'm using it. You can use whatever smoker you want. Let's go outside. I'll see you at the pit. We'll build a fire. We'll get it going, and I'll walk you through the next phase of the cook, which is very important, which is my methodology behind my fire. I did a very in-depth fire management video, and all that's going to feed into how I'm starting my fire for the first 1 to 3 hours of the cook. See you there, my friends. We got both briskets on, and the only thing that I'll tell you here is regardless of the smoker, typically closest to the wall, which is the furthest from you, closest to the wall is the hottest spot, closest to the door is a hot spot, and then the middle is not as hot as the wall and the door. So what I'll do to try to ensure that these cook as evenly as possible is I'm actually going to set these briskets as far back towards my smokestack as I can. One towards the wall like this, one towards the door, and I might move them as I cook. What'll probably end up happening is as they shrink, I'm going to move them closer to each other and a little bit closer towards the firebox. Again, I'm on my 500, so this is how I do it. I'd probably do the same thing if I was on a 250 gallon. On my backyard smoker where I just have enough room for maybe 2 briskets, I'll actually lay my briskets side by side like this with each other, and I'll put one here, one there, and then every 3 or 4 hours I'll just kind of rotate their spacing so that they have equal chance of being closest to the firebox. Briskets are officially in the pit, and here is the next point. It's very important. The way that I do my briskets, my fire is not on. I don't on like I have a button. I haven't started a fire. I like to put my briskets in my pit and then get my fire going. I'll explain that actually in detail here in a little bit, but the briskets are on in a totally cold, neutral smoker, and I'll see you at the firebox as I walk you through the methodology behind slowly climbing your temperatures, slowly getting your briskets acclimated. That's what we're doing, but I'll dig a little deeper here in a second. Fires. Don't have barbecue without fire. So as we know, briskets are on right now. I'm going to start to build my fire. Again, I'd highly suggest you watch the fire management video after you're done with this one so you can get a deeper concept of what I'm talking about here. But I like to start my fires with briskets really, really low in temp, very, very smoky, but I don't go too long. I give it about an hour to an hour and a half in highly smoky conditions. Some would probably consider this dirty smoke. I'll talk about that later, but as far as starting my fire, I'm gonna start my fire with my logs very close together. I'm gonna close down my damper. I'm gonna close my firebox door down pretty significantly, and I'm really just gonna let this fire organically start to smolder and then burn itself. And I'm laying the foundation for the coal bed that I know I need deeper into the cook. And for my backyard guys, in my fire management video, I talked about how I start backyard smokers. So if you don't have a big, 250 gallon, 500 gallon or whatever, in that video, I talk about how I would start an Oklahoma Joe or more of a backyard smoker. So watch that and you'll be perfectly squared away. Concepts are all the same though. We're just cooking brisket. And I told you I was gonna endeavor to tell you all the tips and techniques that I've learned over the years. So let's start off with one that is old faithful. If you have some old onions, a old school kind of trick that I love that you can actually tell a difference is when your brisket first gets on the pit and that meat's raw, that meat is so primed to absorb everything that you give to it, which is why I lay dirty smoke early on, because it's most absorbent at the beginning of the cook. I like to take onions. I think this is like 3 onions I've cut in half. And I like to throw these onions in my firebox, and I'll take some fat off my brisket trimmings and I'll layer this over my fire in the onions, and it gives off one of the most beautiful aromas. It is highly aromatic. The brisket does absorb some of that onion flavor, and I believe it enhances the overall flavor of our barbecue. Now that the meat is on the smoker and I can sit back for a few hours, barring me running the fire, I'm going to map out essentially the next 12 hours of cooking this brisket. Let me start with a couple disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1, everything that I show you today is directly transferable to your smoking apparatus, regardless of size, regardless of quality. Probably just have to adjust things according to your smoker. Disclaimer number 2, you do not have to get this detailed to produce bomb brisket. What I'm doing here is I'm going a little deeper and I'm showing you what I wish I would have known early on, just so I could practice with it. Okay, so first, Old Faithful. I'm going to attempt to show you what I'm talking about. We'll write it out and we're gonna build us a battle plan. Again, briskets are on the smoker 3 hours. 3 hours before I go back out there and mess with them. While we're waiting, I'm gonna fill the time with some teaching. You ready? There's 5 main sections that I break the cook into to help me kind of figure out where I'm at within the cook and then what I'm trying to achieve. What I'm trying to teach you is how to make the best brisket possible. And you can't make the best brisket if you don't check all the boxes. Fat render, bark formation, doneness, flavor, smoke absorption, so on and so forth. You have to check the boxes to be able to say you've made a complete and total brisket. I don't know what time you're gonna get your brisket on, so we'll talk in generals and then take what I'm teaching you and apply it to your cook. Let's jump right into it. We have hour 0 through done, and then we have 5 main time blocks in between brisket on and brisket off. Starting with hour 1 through 2, we're climbing temps and we're holding them right at about 225 degrees, with the main emphasis in time block number 1 being smoke absorption. Now let's unpack that. We've all heard YouTube personalities and barbecue experts say, brisket absorbs the most smoke flavor, or barbecue as a whole absorbs the most smoke flavor initially when you get it on the smoker, right? And that's true, but it's not really true because of some scientific anomaly or something. It's true on the general basis that raw brisket, raw barbecue on a pit has yet to receive any smoke flavor. The second that you start to impute smoke into the cook chamber, it starts to absorb or receive the smoke, thus absorbing smoke flavor. But as we know with brisket specifically, the longer that that brisket is on the smoker, the less it is able to absorb the smoke as you're cooking it. So it absorbs most of the smoke at the beginning because the meat's raw and wet, and then as you cook it, the absorption tapers down. When you first put a brisket on a smoker and you start your fire, how I did earlier, that fire initially starts very dirty. And it starts dirty because there's not a lot of combustion happening. When you get new wood into the firebox and you begin to ignite the wood, we've all seen it, it starts to pump billowy, in quotations, dirty smoke. The reason why, in my opinion, the brisket absorbs most of the smoke flavor in the beginning, one, because it's raw and just hasn't absorbed smoke, and two, because that new fire is pumping a bunch of dirty smoke. And then as you continue to trail that brisket upward, meaning you continue to cook it and the internal temperature rises and then the fire temperature rises, you start to increase the combustion of the fire. And we know when you increase combustion, there's more oxygen. More oxygen means a cleaner fire. And then when you're running a cleaner fire, obviously the fire is not as dirty, not as smoky. And so we can actually use that to our advantage. We can use the fact that a new fire is a dirty fire, one, and we can use the fact that a raw brisket absorbs the most smoke flavor. We can use that to our advantage and essentially run a lower temperature fire, i.e. a little bit of a dirtier fire for the first couple hours because we just want to nail it with as much smoke flavor as possible. Now don't be worried, guys. You won't ruin the brisket. The brisket will actually thank you. Your family members will actually thank you that you started that fire a little dirtier. And then we'll start to slowly creep our temperatures up as we get into hour 3 and hour 4. Hour 3 and hour 4 is going to look like a 25-degree bump, thereabout, to 250 degrees, with the main emphasis now, I forget about smoke absorption, and I am immediately moving into bark formation. One of the most important attributes to a perfectly smoked craft brisket is the formation of a beautiful bark. Guys, a brisket void of bark in my book is a failure. And so I feel like I can't film a brisket video without stressing the fact that forming a bark is paramount in smoking your brisket. I'm not gonna dig into it right now. As you continue to watch this video, I'll show you what I look out for when I'm attempting to form a beautiful bark. But for me, starting at hour 3 and really beyond for the rest of the cook, my brain immediately switches to bark and bark formation. Really, guys, the bark formation starts the second that you put that brisket into the smoker and introduce smoke and heat. So really all of these things are happening all at once, but I just have to compartmentalize it for us as we're studying the art of smoking a brisket in hour 3, starting hour 3, going through hour 4. My obsession is bark. Moving on, hour 5 through 8. We're bumping another 25 degrees. We're going to 275. What's happening at 275, you ask? Solid question. Bark formation continued plus tenderizing. Hours 5 through 8, we're bumping the temperature another 25 degrees. We're hitting 275. 275 for me is the money spot, the sweet spot for any smoker. If I just had to pick one temperature that covers all of this, 275 is the temperature. It sets bark. It produces the right type of smoke. It tenderizes meat. It renders fat. It does what you need it to do. So starting around hour 5, I have got to see my smoker inching up to 275. Now keep in mind, as you're working through this list in your head and you're kind of trying to internalize this and visualize it, unless you're on a Traeger, you're not twisting a dial. So part of this process, smoking a brisket, is a law of averages. Meaning if my temperature for an hour was 400, and then for another hour was 100, and then for another hour was 200, I'm not so worried about the spikes for the most part. What I'm worried about is, well, what was the average temperature over the 12 hours that I was cooking it? And so the process that I'm drawing out is one big increase. If you're looking at a graph, this graph is slowly climbing up. Now, what's happening if you were to zoom in on the graph is a little bit of this, but the graph is still trending up. And if you zoom out, it just looks like a linear northern line, okay? So hour 5 through hour 8, 275. Now we are really cooking the brisket. Also, now we are really starting to think about the momentum that we're building as the brisket is starting to begin the process of evaporative cooling. I know that on the horizon is a stall. My brisket is going to stall out on me. So it's really important now that I start to build the momentum, start to climb the internal velocity inside of my brisket, because I'm forward thinking. I know that I have a stall on the horizon. I know that I need to start cooking this thing. I know that I need to start rendering fat and tenderizing meat. And so anyways, hour 5, my brain now switches directly to continuing to form the bark and enter the core of the cook itself. I'll add this last note as we're talking about entering the core of the cook. If you don't build enough momentum in the cook itself, you run the risk of not creating enough velocity, and then your brisket starts to dry out rather than cook. Meaning it starts to just evaporate itself. It starts to evaporative cool too much because you're not moving the meat along. And so the net product a lot of times is just a dry brisket. And the reason why that happens most times is because you just didn't really build the momentum enough. The brisket just naturally starts to pump out and evaporate itself, and it just loses too much moisture through the cook. Moving on, hour 9 through 10, temperature 285. What's this time block, you ask? Well, the stall. Dun dun dun. The stall. The dreaded stall. Guys, I'm gonna show you a killer way to make the stall obsolete because I'm upping my temps. I'm building the velocity. I knew that the stall was gonna happen 9 hours ago. Starting around hour 8, you do not wanna be asleep. You do not want to have had too many beers the hours prior. This is not the time for you to think, oh, let me throw a heavy log on and walk off and mess around for an hour and a half. You don't want to do that. If you walk away and you allow your smoker to drop temps for too long, you've sealed the deal. That brisket it'll walk into your house, it'll sit on the couch, and it won't leave until it wants to. So we have got to be forward thinking around this time frame. And no, stall's on the way. Let me put the German water down. Let me pick up the agua. Let me lock in because I don't want to mess it up. If you mess it up now, recovery will elude you. Hour 11 until done, 300-ish degrees. What are we talking about here? Fat render. All right, guys, we are at the end of our 5-tenant time block. And fat render is how we round this out. Really, somewhere between hour 9 and 11, I am checking for fat render. Fat render to me is what separates the good from the great. I feel like anyone can make a good brisket. You run the risk though of not properly rendering your fat. And again, in my trimming video, which is linked here in the description, I taught you guys how to trim with the fat render in mind. But also now the rubber hits the road and we actually have to render the fat. Fat render is very important because what we've essentially done is we slowly, gradually raised our temps. The fat's slowly starting to render. It's gonna juice itself. It's gonna make a pool of fat, and then it's gonna cook itself in the fat. It's beautiful. So right here, hour 11, we've allowed this brisket for about 9 to 11 hours to slowly start to render itself. Now we want to crank that heat up and we just want to blast that fat cap. And now we want to take it from slowly rendered to that pillowy, caramel looking layer of fat. And from my experience, most of that happens right at the tail end. And it will produce that quintessential bite that we look for when we're eating smoked Texas style brisket. You gotta have that fat cap. You gotta be able to check that box off. And my friends, before we cut to whatever the next scene is gonna be, if you're liking what I'm talking about, if you're listening to this and you're just eating it up, you're like, my goodness, YouTube has been dry of just a dude who loves barbecue, who's not scared to post a 2-hour-long masterclass. I don't know if this will be 2 hours. I've been talking all day. But what I'm saying is, if you've been hungry for someone to just spill all the beans with no gotchas. Would you like it? Would you like the video? Would you throw me a subscription? That'd mean a lot. Thanks, guys. 3 hours into smoking our brisket, and it wouldn't be barbecue if we didn't get some rain. We just had a near torrential downpour. It is what it is. Things are lightening up. The hope is that the good Lord brings the sun out. I tell you this because, guys, you never know what the elements are going to give you. You just got to take what it gives you. The good news when it rains, though, I love when it rains because it adds some extra ambient humidity into the ecosystem that ends up getting pulled into our smoker, and the net result is just a nice moist brisket. Humidity helps even out the temperatures inside of your smoker. That's why you see people introduce a water pan, which I have in there, but I might not even need it because, again, it was raining. But I wanted to bring you guys in just hour and a half, 2 hours in. Remember, we are setting our bark. Hour 1 to 3, we are obsessed with our bark, and I want to show you what I wish I got to see coming up in barbecue, and that's what does the perfect bark begin to look like, and I'll show you. So come check this out. If you look at the top of our brisket, again, this has been in here for less than 3 hours, and immediately it's starting to dry itself out on top. Now, what I want to do, guys, when these briskets are still, sub 3 hours, 4 hours, I want to keep humidity in my cook chamber. Again, I introduced a water pan. I filled it with warm water, and that's going to keep this surface as moist as possible for as long as possible, because there's a point where we want to keep the brisket moist on the surface, and then there's a point where we want to let the brisket begin to dry out and let that bark start to harden. Right now, 2.5 or so hours in, sub 3 hours, this is exactly what I want to see. I can rub this off in places. That means it's not totally set, but in other places, I can't rub the bark off. Like right there, I cannot rub the bark off. So guys, they say if you're looking, you ain't cooking. I don't know about all that. I am certainly looking within the first 3 hours because I need to figure out, do I need to introduce more humidity into my cook chamber? Do I need to adjust my fire? Is my fire cooking too hot? Are the flames too wild? Do I need to back it down? Is my fat starting to bubble on me? If my fat is starting to bubble, I'm going to lose my bark. It's going to flake off. If my fat bubbles, that means I'm cooking too hot, too heavy. So there's a lot of information that I need to get in those first few hours. The main piece is, how is my bark setting? I can't stress to you guys enough, humidity plays a massive part in the way that we're setting our bark. Again, I want to keep my bark as wet as possible on the surface for as long as possible without introducing third-party moisture separate from what's in the cook chamber, meaning a spritz. The biggest mistake I see guys make, I see folks just mopping their brisket down with tons of spritz too early on, and you're adding too much moisture in it. It doesn't allow the bark to sit. You want organic moisture on the surface of the brisket. We add organic moisture via the water pan in our cook chamber. Again, on a day like today, we just had it dump rain. That's gonna help me tremendously in keeping my environment moist. Once we deem the initial bark is set, meaning you can't really rub it off. I mean, you probably could if you tried hard enough, but you can't really rub it off. That's set. Now we want to transition into letting the moisture evaporate itself out. We'll pull out our water pan, and then we want to enter the process of letting that surface of the brisket dry itself out, barring where we do spritz areas that are too dry. Again, I'll show you when that time comes, but I just wanted to bring you in within hour 0 to 3 to show you the beauty of setting a bark. Stay tuned, my friends. We are at exactly 2.5 hours that brisket has been on the pit. We just got done showing you what a sub 3 hour, oh, the sun is literally coming out. The Lord is good, my friends. We just got done showing you a sub 3 hour bark check. Again, we want to make sure moving into hour 3 that our bark's situated. And now, if you remember the chart that I mapped out for us, right around the 3 hour mark, we need to start seeing about 250 degrees in temperature. We're trying to climb our brisket internal temp, and we're trying to climb the cook chamber temp, and we do that from the firebox. So I'm just going to bring you guys along. Again, I dropped a very helpful fire management video, but this is What are we doing with our fire while we're cooking? And for my guys who are like, Frisbee, come on, bro, we don't have a 500 gallon. Guys, what I'm gonna show you is directly transferable to your backyard smoker. You're just gonna have to use smaller logs. You're just gonna have to adjust your dampers accordingly. I can't make videos for all the cooking apparatuses, but what I can do is teach you the kind of the fundamentals, and then you can apply it. Okay, so here's what I got going on. I got 2 large, very dense logs. And when I say dense, I mean moisture content is at least 20% on those, and I have those sitting on top. Underneath though, I have logs that are ready to coal out, meaning they've ran their life cycle as logs, they've fully combusted, and now they're ready to be turned into coals. So to climb my temperatures on this guy, is I'm gonna move my 2 top logs out, I'm gonna break down my base logs. I'm breaking my base logs, making sure not to hammer these because I don't want to kick up too much ash. Pieces like this, you might wonder, well, what do I do with that? It still ran its cycle. I don't want to crack it too hard. So I'm just gonna feed it back in and shove it down in there. Making my coal bed. These were once base logs. Now they burn their life cycle out. Remember, again, this guy, I could crack it and break it up. I don't want to kick up too much ash, so I'm just going to drive this into my coal bed and make it one with the bed, like so. See that? And now the fire doesn't know any different. Now remember my 2 top logs, these are nice and heavy, and they're just ready to blow themselves into total combustion. So I'm going to feed these like so. I'm gonna space them a couple inches apart, pull them closer to the door, and then I'm just gonna smack them into the coals. Last step is I'm going to cut off the edge, outer edge airflow by putting coals there. And I'm gonna shove these coals underneath. I don't want too much airflow underneath. I don't want these logs too hot. Now that we just set our cross base logs, I'm gonna lay 2 more logs. Early on in the cook, I love dense logs. I love barky logs. That's where I'm getting a lot of my flavor, a lot of my smoke. This is a mix of post oak and white oak. And again, guys, these are heavy, dense logs. If you're using a backyard smoker, just adjust accordingly to what fits your smoker. But again, the principles are generally the same if you want to run fires like this. And I'll show you exactly what I do. It's very simple. I'm taking my flat log on the bottom and I'm going right over the top, like so. And then I'm going to take the flattest part of this log, which is this right side. This side's a little shorter. And I'm going to lay that flat side directly next to my other log. And I'm going to give them minimal spacing. I want the spacing to be even. I want them to almost touch each other, but not totally touch each other. This is going to help them combust. Look, almost immediate combustion. Again, I got my firebox door totally wide open, so it's getting more airflow than I'd like, but once I close it down, that's gonna settle itself out. Now, if this was too hot, what I would do is I'd keep my firebox door the same. I very rarely move my firebox door. I want the airflow to be consistent. Again, the bigger the fire, the more combustion, the more air it's gonna draw in. So I don't adjust my door so much as adjust my fire. But let's say I put my 2 logs on, I adjust my fire, put my 2 logs on, I know I wanna get to 250. Oops, I jumped it too hot. It's 275. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull all of my logs closer. I'm gonna take out any empty space. If I have 2 logs that are sitting like this, but let's say there's room and there's a bunch of flames in the middle, I'm just gonna put my logs closer to block off the airflow, step number 1. If that still doesn't do it, I'm gonna adjust my smokestack. My smokestack is a little more than open right now, and I'll close it down just a little bit. And all that's gonna do is it's gonna slow down the amount of oxygen, the amount of air that's being pulled into my firebox, and it's gonna even out my fire, and it's gonna allow those temperatures to drop just ever so slightly. Again, I do hairline tweaks on my smokestack. I built this smoker. I hand built this smoker myself. I know exactly what it needs, when it needs it. That's the level of proficiency that I hope you guys achieve. And you only get there by making a bunch of mistakes and cooking a bunch of food. And yeah, so it's fun. It's barbecue. That is, to summarize, hour 0 to hour 3. That's the first check. That's one of the first firebox adjustments. And I'll see you guys next, likely when we spritz this brisket down. At about the 5-hour mark is when I am doing my first real spritz check, plus some preventative maintenance. I'll show you what I mean by preventative maintenance right now. So I'm gonna pop this puppy open. I got my hog sprayer. I'll drop a link in the description to the exact model that I use. It has a setting to shoot a stream, direct little beam, or a mist. And depending upon what the brisket needs will dictate the type of output that I select. In this hog sprayer, we have 50-50 apple cider vinegar and warm water. Do not put cold liquids on your briskets anywhere along the way as you're spritzing them. So this is warm water mixed with room temperature apple cider vinegar. Let's pop the top and let's check it out. Lord have mercy. Those look beautiful. 5 hours in, our bark could not look any better. Our bark is set, guys. This is not rubbing out. I trust this bark. It is set and the fat is just rendering beautifully. I don't know if you remember, if you watched the how to trim a brisket video, and if you haven't, go back and watch it. Right here is where I scalp my brisket. I'll lean this up so you folks can see it. Right there is where I scalp my brisket, and you can barely even tell. I was able to form a bark all the way around what would have been a scalp. Now, if I would have scalped it, there would have been a quarter-size circle there, and it would have pulled up and messed my bark up. So again, if you haven't watched that video, go watch that. You can see how I recover. And because of that, we don't have any pooling. However, on this guy, if you can see right there, towards the end, we have some pooling. And that's not what we want. So I'm gonna dump this. And I'll lean this guy up here. Pooling typically happens, you'll see it most times in 2 places. One towards the tip of the lean, like this one. Because our lean is curling, it's creating a divot, which causes this to pool. I'll show you how we fix that curling in about 10 seconds. Or you'll see pooling, like I mentioned, at a divot in the brisket, or possibly where you've scalped it out. Okay, so we need to do a couple things. I'm just going to identify places of my brisket that are starting to dry up on me that might need some moisture. Now let me add this caveat, guys. If you've not listened to anything I've said so far, listen to this. It is so possible to over spritz your brisket. And it's possible not only to over spritz your brisket, it's possible to spritz it too soon. And I know us as backyard barbecuers, man, we want to use all the tallow and all the fire and all the spritz and all the barbecue sauce. We want all of it. Less is more in barbecue. It is so possible to over spritz your brisket. And if you over spritz it and you do that too soon, you will totally ruin your bark and you'll be disappointed by the final product. So just know, as we're talking about spritzing, you can go overboard. Okay, so let's talk about spritzing. So we have the stream, which that's the stream. And then this is a general spray. What I want to do at the 5-hour mark is get my stream and just hit places of the brisket that are dry. And on this one, there is not a single dry spot on this brisket. Not at all. Nowhere to be found. And that's because we're running a healthy, clean fire. Now, let's say there were dry spots on this brisket. I could possibly hit this corner right here, and I just hit it while it's tipped up. If I do it flat and I hit this, it might settle and pool. So I want to make sure that I pull it up. And then I expose the edges, and I'm able to just hit the edges ever so slightly. That brisket is pretty well spritzed. I'm just going to leave it. We're going to let it roll. If you remember in the beginning of the video, I talked about moisture inside of the cook chamber. Now is the time where I want to start to remove the moisture out of my cook chamber. And because this is pumping out fat, intermuscular and topical fat, This fat is starting to keep the surface of our brisket moist, and we want that. We don't need to add any extra moisture. We'll just use what the brisket is giving us. But I do want this to start to dry itself out and really let that bark sit in here. Step number 2, preventative maintenance. Here I have some foil. The shiny side is facing in towards the brisket. The dull side is facing out. If you can see, this lean is starting to curl up. We do not want that to curl. We want this to lay as flat as humanly possible. Remember, we're climbing our temperatures. We're going to start to take this smoker into some territories that are charted, but they're nice and hot. And we know that it's possible to overcook and dry out edges, curl this thing up. So all we're going to do is this is a lean, towards the side that's curling. I'm just going to set this directly underneath, and I'm going to pull it up. I'm at a side angle. I'm going to pull it up, wrap it over the top, bring it back down around and under. And then something that I do, and do it tight and then back it off, meaning it's tight now. I'm going to get my 2 fingers underneath, and I'm going to lift this up and then peel it back. Not too tight, not too loose. We can still set our bark underneath. It's just a preventative protective layer to stop the curling. That is pretty well protected. We'll still set a bark, not too tight. And then I'm gonna take this now at the 5-hour mark, and I'm gonna move this back against the wall, back towards the wall side. Because I want those to cook evenly. Now, at about the rough halfway mark, I've rotated my briskets. Let's talk about this guy. We have our pooling. We'll drain off the pooling. I'll show you a little trick that I do sometimes if the pooling's real bad. It's not really bad, I'm not too worried about it, but I'll show you what I do anyways. That's where this guy comes into play. But first, let's tint it up. Same play. Now the pool. This is a ball of foil. You as the pitmaster, if you deem the pool is just too much for you to bear, you don't think you'll ever set a bark, just take a piece of foil, pack it loosely, lean the brisket up, bring it to a point, and set the brisket up. That is slowly starting to drain itself out. If you need to go higher, go higher. Again, don't leave it like this forever. Just leave it long enough for it to clear itself out and set a little bark. But really guys, I very rarely do that. At the end of the day, I just kind of leave it. This one I shall leave. We're gonna close that puppy down, and we're running now 275 degrees at the 5-hour mark. It's imperative that I start to dry the surface out, render the intermuscular fat, deepen my bark, deepen my color, really cook this brisket, and that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna climb my temps up to 275. We'll check back in a little bit. Call it 45 minutes to an hour. I just want this to settle in at about 275, and then we'll check back somewhere around the 6.5-hour mark, and we'll see what our brisket's telling us. Hopefully they're running smoothly. Hopefully there's nothing that I have to troubleshoot. Maybe the barbecue universe will throw us something wild and we'll have to deal with it. I'll see you guys then. What's going on, my friends? Welcome to the intermission. Welcome to smoke break. Hey, you found yourself in the middle of a smoke break. What's a smoke break? I cut, light, puff a delicious cigar or cigars, depending upon what I'm barbecuing that day and the kind of trouble I'm trying to get into. I might have one or two. Today, we have nothing better than the crown head, Le Pâtissier. I've never taken a French class in my life, so if I put the old Midwestern twang on it, apologies in advance. This is a beautiful cigar. Oily, semi-toothy wrapper, still very smooth. This is I believe this is a Longsdale. A little bit longer, a little bit skinnier than a Corona. On the nose, a little bit of coffee, a little bit of cocoa, kind of that quintessential barnyard tobacco smell. Excited to cut, light, and smoke this, and then tell you what's on my heart. The cut, light, and smoked has commenced. Love this cigar. Now what's on my heart? I'll jump right into it. We'll keep it brief. Guys, I've worked very hard to try to build this channel out and not shill myself out to companies and not do money grabs, and you'll never see me do that. If you see me do that, just unfollow the channel and don't even give me the courtesy of telling me why, because I don't deserve your support if you ever see me doing a money grab. This is not a money grab. I love hats and I love barbecue, and over the years I have really desired to design my own hats, and so I've done that, and I'm very excited and I'm happy about the product that I've created. Anyways, guys, I just wanted to take 30 seconds to tell you I have designed a couple hats. Hopefully these are the first of many designs, but again, I'm a hat guy, and so I've designed 2 hats that are just rooted in my love for all things barbecue. And so this one on the right says, "For the love of barbecue." This was a term that I said in the middle of a video, just not even thinking about it. And then as my wife was editing the video, I heard myself say, "For the love of barbecue." And I said, you know what? I'm gonna put that on a hat, and I did. And this one really is just kind of what I consider an OG, the OG hat. You just got a guy sitting on a lawn chair, drinking a cold one next to his offset smoker with the sunset. And so I put on a hat, Beer Fire Barbecue. You can't get any more thorough than that. So anyways, guys, if you want any of these hats, feel free to follow the link in the description. I got my website there. Show some love and buy 1 or 2 of these. And if not, no worries. Maybe I'll create a hat that fits your fancy. Smoke break, over and out. We're about 8 hours in. Brisket's been moving along flawlessly. Somewhere around the 7.5 to 8 hour mark, I know the stall is imminent. The brisket might even be in the stall. I'm about to take you guys out there. We'll probe it and we'll check it in a second. But I know somewhere around this time frame, 7, 8, 8.5 hours, the brisket is going to likely temp between 160 to 165 degrees. That is the stall to me. Really, I start to think about the stall between about 155 to 165. So let's go to the pit. Let's look at the brisket. Let's temp it out. Thermopin, best internal thermometer on the market. They don't pay me to say that. I'm saying it on my own volition. We're gonna temp with our Thermopin, and we're gonna see where our brisket's at, and I'll explain what I'm thinking with as we enter the stall. Back at the pit as promised, 8 hours on the pit. I know that these are probably temping at least 155, probably 160. And again, the stall means they're gonna hang out right in that wheelhouse, anywhere between 30 minutes, I've seen it to an hour. Let's check these briskets out. Come on in close and I'll show you kind of what I'm thinking with. Remember, we have this protective foil on, but we have some pooling here, so we'll just drain this pooling. We likely won't be able to set a bark on that guy. That's okay. I'm just gonna temp this out and we'll see where it's at. Again, I don't temp my briskets until I think I'm close to or in the stall, and I go right in between the point and the lean, right where they kind of meet each other. And I'm at 174 on this guy, so actually, guys, I pretty much blasted through the stall. But what I like to do is I don't really trust my first probe, so I use that same hole, and I just start kind of poking around within that same hole, and I'm picking up about the same variant. I look for about a 3-degree variant from where I'm poking, and I'm getting anywhere between 175 to 179, 176. I'm good with that. I'm good there. And I'm just gonna go down into the lean a little bit. 175, 176. So I feel good about that. This brisket is actually outside of the stall, so I'll explain what we do next with that. Let's pull this other brisket forward and let's see what it's telling us. Bark is just set beautifully. And as a note on spritzing, again, I got my hog sprayer. I haven't spritzed these since the last time I talked about spritzing, but if I were to spritz, I would just likely hit this spot right on the corner, just to give it some moisture. Now let's see if this is in the stall. 170, 169, it's pretty much out. 170, 169 there. Again, I'm just poking around 172. What I'm trying to do when I poke is I'm trying to find the highest measurement. You don't want to maul this brisket. You don't want to samurai jack this thing to death, but poke around a little bit in the same hole. Don't make many holes, and see if you can't find the highest in the lowest spot. 169 looks to be the lowest that I found. 173, and I'm going towards the lean there. 173 seems to be the high. So this is just about out of the stall. Again, I'll drop down into the lean. I'm feeling more than I'm actually paying attention to the temperature. but it's temping the same in the lean as it is the midway point. This lean is feeling really, really tough. It's feeling really tight. It's certainly not done. And so I'm just gonna temp that to see where we're at. I'm going right in between the lean. 170. I'm going a little deeper. 174 in between the lean. So these guys are out of the stall. The reason why we came out at hour 8 and did not experience the stall was because of what I talked about in the beginning of the video, and that's mapping out your cook with temperatures in mind. Remember, we started off low temperatures and we continued to build the momentum. Because we did that, I didn't experience the stall from a time perspective. Sure, the briskets stalled at some point. Now, if you had a leave-in thermometer with all the cables and whatnot and the fancy wireless monitoring, you would have seen that stall in real time. I don't need to do that. You don't need to do that, because we know that we just will climb our temperatures up high enough to blow through the stall, and that's what we did. Now, let's take a step back and let's think, well, what if you went and you temped it and it was 155 or 160? And then you went back in another 30 minutes and it didn't move. And then another 30 minutes and it only went up a degree. The best thing you can do is bump your temps by 10-degree increments. Don't go crazy. Don't think, oh, I've been in the stall for 2 hours, I need to go blast 300. No, we save 300 for the end. If you're on a backyard smoker, that might look like 265 for you rather than 275. Only you know your smoker. You know what's too hot. You've likely cooked on your smoker before. You know what's running too hot. If you don't know, well, we're figuring it out. But go up another 10 degrees from where you're at and just give it time. Check back in 20 minutes, see if you bumped up a couple degrees. If not, keep it at that temperature, give it another 20, and just check it every 20 minutes. You'll bump out of that stall at some point. Guys, don't worry at all. The stall is natural. You will recover. We just want to climb our temperatures and we want to be forward thinking. The blessing that you have, hopefully, is that you caught this video sometime either before you started cooking the brisket or during your brisket cook. If you're watching this and you're in the stall, well, brother, welcome to barbecue. But hopefully we have enough foresight to know that building the momentum of our fire will help us troubleshoot and blow past the stall. Once the brisket exits the stall, immediately transition into finishing my brisket. You have many options when you finish your brisket. You could foil boat your brisket. You could wrap it in butcher paper. You could run it unwrapped. You could Texas crutch it and wrap it in foil. You have some options. The name of the game now is fat render and continuing to cook and tenderize our meat. Now that you're out of the stall, you have to figure out what route you want to go with finishing your brisket. Let me leave you with this tip because it's almost the most important thing. If you didn't listen to anything I said, listen to this. It is possible to wrap your brisket too soon. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is wrapping your brisket at or during or through the stall. You do not want to wrap your brisket at or during or through the stall. You only want to wrap your brisket directly after the stall. In my opinion, about the best temperature to wrap your brisket is about 170 to 175. 175 is about perfect. I'll explain wrapping here in a little bit, but I just wanted to talk to you guys now that you just saw we're out of our stall. Now is the time that I can say, if I'm going to wrap, I'm going to wrap now. What will happen if you wrap too soon is all of that moisture that brisket is pumping out is going to pump out inside of the apparatus in which you've used to wrap your brisket. That is going to wash your bark out. It's going to make for a soggier brisket, and the finished product won't be as good as the product would have been if you just waited to wrap. Post-stall fire check. I know I need to climb my temps. If you haven't picked up on the pattern and theme of this entire video, we're slowly ramping temperatures. I know I need to climb my temperatures. I know I want this thing somewhere in the wheelhouse of about 285, 290 for my smoker. If you're on a backyard smoker, maybe you adjust that down 10 or 15 degrees. Maybe for your smoker, it's 275. Only you know. You got to play with it. But I know for my smoker, the best fat rendering happens above 285, close to 300 degrees, and that is about what's going to happen when I wrap my brisket and I put it back in there to finish it off. We are rendering fat and further tenderizing our brisket. So check out the fire. It's pretty well died down, and that's okay because I'm going to rebuild it. I just want the coals. So look, everything is almost combusted just beautifully. As you break your coals down, it's gonna make your firebox hotter because you're exposing the new coals. Look how pretty that is. And I'm gonna spread this out. I'm gonna get my running logs, my base logs. Positioning is everything. Because I broke that coal bed down, as you saw, I coaled everything out, if that's a word. I coaled it. I broke everything down to coals, so it lost the flame. The flame gives us some of that extra heat. There's good heat in the coals, but of course the live active flame gives us more heat. And so I built the fire tall like that, and I kept everything open because now I really want to focus on a good, clean, high convective fire. What I'm going to do in my pit is essentially transition my pit into a convection oven. I mean, it is a convection oven, but I'm going to open up my smokestack just a little bit more. It's going to pull, it's going to draw more. I'm going to space my logs out just a little bit more, and I'm moving away from kind of that dirty smoke, if you will, as I'm pumping a bunch of smoke into my brisket early on. And now I'm really transitioning and focusing on open logs, convective fire. I really want to start to render that fat. And so that's the fire that you saw me build. Stout coal bed, some taller logs, and now I'm just gonna let that thing really combust itself. And then as you saw through the whole video, once I got the temperature that I want, close my door down, adjust my damper, let it settle in, and I'm shooting for about 285, 290 as we push to the golden number for my smoker, which is about 300 to 310 degrees. All right, fellas, we got our first brisket off of the pit, and it is looking spectacular. Let me give you the rundown. We're about to wrap it in some butcher paper. So the first thing that I want to say is don't pull your brisket, set it to the side, get all your butcher paper and all your stuff ready. This thing will decline in temperature very fast, and you run the risk of, if it falls back into the stall zone, it's gonna have to kind of restart itself again. You really want to spend less than about 90 seconds on the wrap itself. You got to be very quick, rapido. Now, the perfect sweet spot temperature to pull a brisket and wrap to me is 175. Anything less than 175, you risk being inside of the stall, like I talked about earlier. If you wrap a brisket while it's in the stall, it's gonna pump all that moisture out in the wrapping. Now, what you will have is a really aesthetic brisket. When you go to serve it, it'll dump out all of that juice. But if that's what you're after, just use beef tallow, and I can show you how to do that down the road. If you're after the nice aesthetic opening in presentation, don't get that from wrapping too early. Now, this is 18-inch peach butcher paper. Whatever you call this, it holds the butcher paper and allows you to roll it out and slice it. I love this thing. If you don't own one of these, and if you don't have a commercial roll of 18-inch peach butcher paper, I'll drop the link to both of these in the description. Grab it. If you're not cooking tons of briskets all year, this will last you for over 12 months. It's a good investment. So what I do, and I know, guys, I know I'm about to get all nerdy, but I don't know how to teach brisket without getting into the weeds. And for me, a good wrap starts with the right amount of paper. So if you have one of these, what I do is I align the butcher paper holder slicer up parallel with my left shoulder, and then I grab it and I just straighten my arm out to shoulder's length, about here. Shoulder's length, and then I go just a little bit further to right outside of shoulder's length. And now my arm's fully straight and I rip. Piece number one, we'll do the same thing for piece number two. A little bit outside. And as you can see, they're perfectly even. Let's wrap this bad boy. Now, guys, I know you might be looking at this and thinking, dude, you're just wrapping brisket. And I know, but there is an art to wrapping brisket, and it is so easy to get this wrong. When you wrap briskets, it is possible to overwrap your brisket. The point of wrapping your brisket is to protect the exterior while you enter finishing temperatures. Finishing temperatures are, for me, at least 300 degrees on my big pit, 500 gallon. On my backyard, finishing temps are 275, 285. Now, you can run a brisket totally unwrapped, and actually, I'm gonna do that so you can see the two options. But you got to get real particular with your fire management if you're leaving it unwrapped, because at that temp, it's very easy to burn a brisket, to burn the exterior. So again, the point of the wrap is to protect the exterior while allowing the brisket still to breathe. It's not foil, so it's not going to steam. It's still going to breathe, and it's still going to take in just a nominal amount of smoke. That's why we prefer butcher paper. Now, let's wrap it. Spray our butcher paper down, nice and wet. That way your paper is pliable. And guys, if I'm moving a little too fast, I apologize. If I don't go game speed, I mess the wrap up. I don't know why it is, so I'm just gonna go a little faster so I can get the muscle memory. So, pull this up, pull it around. You want just enough to tuck right underneath the brisket. Then you're gonna tuck this underneath right around the lean, and you wanna straighten your paper up like this. Slide it down. You're gonna bring your hand, come around the point now, and do the same thing. I'm wrapping that underneath, and I'm coming far enough to bring this other side over. And I'm straightening it out. Now that everything's laid flat, our fat cap is still facing the top. Now, pull it towards you nice and tight. Okay, that's tight. We're gonna go over once. Fat cap is down. Make sure it's tight to you. If you want, you can roll this in, just so it's nice and tight. Fat side is back up. Now you got this extra. I don't like a ton of extra butcher paper, so I don't have scissors on hand, so I'm just gonna rip it. Pull it tight to you. That brisket is done, wrapped, ready to go, back on the smoker. And something I like to do is just kind of roll this back in, just so it's nice, tight, aerodynamic. That, my friends, is how you wrap a brisket. If you wanted to, you could put some beef tallow in here. I don't love doing that. I find that if you get good quality meat and you cook it right, there's enough intermuscular fat to give what you want it to do. If I were to do beef tallow, which I've done beef tallow a lot, so I'm not anti-beef tallow, but if you were to do beef tallow, the way that I do it is I just take probably 2 tablespoons, not a lot, of cold beef tallow, chilled beef tallow, or room temperature beef tallow. I don't melt it down for this, and I just put it right underneath. I put 1 tablespoon on the lean, 1 tablespoon on the fatty, and then I put my brisket on top, and then I wrap it the same way and continue to cook it. We just put that brisket back on the pit. Again, I'm cooking 2 brisket 2 separate ways. So as you can see, I have the 1 brisket that we just wrapped. This is the lean, and I'm pointing the lean towards the firebox. The fatty's been getting hammered this entire time, and typically you'll find that the point cooks faster than the lean. So in an effort to even them out, we're now showing the lean some love and pointing it towards the firebox, hopefully to continue to tenderize that and even that out. This is the brisket that I'm going to run unwrapped. Why am I running it unwrapped, you ask? Well, I figured I'd just show you 2 different ways to cook a brisket. This brisket's temping probably in the wheelhouse of 175, 180? 185, 184, perfect. That's 184, 187, 190. See, it's jumping around. Again, I'm looking for the highest and the lowest temperature. That's in the point. Let's go down where the point meets the lean. It's gonna be a little lower. 184, 186, 188. So still fairly even. That's good news. Now we're going into the lean. 187, 188. That feels great, guys. I'm worried less about the temperature and more about how it feels when I'm poking it. The lean is still a little tough. That's why now I've pointed my lean towards the fire. Now let's temp it in the lean, right towards the midway point. 187 in the lean. I like how that feels. I like how my fatty feels. This guy's almost done. The only thing I'm gonna do now is I really need to pay attention to this brisket because it's unwrapped. I'm gonna drive my temperatures up. I'm gonna finish these upwards of about 300 degrees. It is very easy to overdo it and burn it. So now more than ever is it important that I actually spritz this thing. And all I'm gonna do, uncover this with the foil. Again, guys, remember, I'm gonna lean it up. I got the whole story now. This side, you can tell it's a little darker than the rest of the lean. I gotta hit that. I'm gonna hit this. That's a good, what the folks call burn-ins, kind of. towards the point is a little crispy. So I'm gonna hit that. And I'm just gonna hit this whole thing going down. Now I'm gonna put my spray on, and I'm just gonna hit the top with my spray. If there was a time to overspray a brisket, now is the time. When the smoker's piping hot, the surface is totally dried out, barring the topical intermuscular fat. That brisket is gonna cook beautifully. I'll cover my lean back up. It will just keep rocking and rolling, uncovered, until it's time to pull. The last thing I'll add on this topic is the following. Once you get your brisket back on the smoker wrapped, or if you're finishing unwrapped, at this point in time when it's temping post-stall, 175, 178, 180, it is imperative that for the next about an hour and a half, as you're running your fires hotter, for the next hour and a half, you're checking your brisket every 20 minutes on the dot. Set a repeat reminder. I don't know what time of day or night it is for you. You do not want to drop the ball here. This is single-handedly the most important time to lock in and pay attention to your briskets. Every 20 minutes, you're going to temp your brisket. Once you deem it done and ready, pull it. I'll show you how to deem a brisket done and ready, how I do it. We'll pull it together. If you go too long, it is so easy for that brisket to build momentum, and then it shoots past done into overdone and then into dry. And we don't want that. Every 20 minutes, check your brisket until it's done. I'll show you how to tell it's done. In the next section, stick with me, guys. We're almost done. We're in the home stretch. Appreciate you. As a man who takes his own advice, it's been about 20 minutes, and I'm going to come check my wrapped brisket, and I'm going to check my unwrapped brisket. And I wanted to show you something that's really important that that should be said about how to temp a brisket wrapped in butcher paper. You don't, and I'm going to open this in a second, so bear with me, but you do not want to poke around your brisket. There's 2 points on a brisket that you want to temp. The first point is where the fatty meets the lean, where they cross over each other, which is right about the midway point of the brisket. And then the second point you want to temp is the lean. You just want to poke into the lean in the middle of the brisket. And when a brisket's wrapped, once you make those 2 entry points, that is where you're temping every single time. You don't temp one place one time and 20 minutes later do a different place. It's the same places every time, so I'll show you. So here's our butcher paper brisket. Point, lean, they meet somewhere in and around here. So I'm just gonna stick my thermopin in at a slight angle towards the lean, right about there. And we're temping 167 there. I'll explain why that is in a second. And then on our lean, we're gonna go into the lean about here. I'm worried more about the doneness and the texture of the lean more so than the temp. I'm just poking around. 167 there. Okay, we'll leave it. I'll explain that in a second. The reason why I wanted to catch this piece on camera is because if you don't know what's happening, you might mistake the drop in temperatures for a malfunction in your brisket cooking. Don't worry. We pulled the brisket off the pit. We temped it earlier at about 180 internal. That's out of the stall, and we wrapped our brisket. And remember I said, try to wrap your brisket as soon as you possibly can once it comes off the pit. The second you take it out of its nice incubator, it's going to start to decline in temperatures. If you drop too far into that stall zone, 155 to 165, it has a higher propensity to hang out in there, thus prolonging the cook. So I just temped this brisket after wrapping it and putting it on the smoker for 20 minutes, and it temped out at stall temperatures. It temped, you saw it, 167 degrees. That's a false stall. And I know this is like, what do you mean there's 2 stalls? Yeah, no, it's just a false stall, meaning it's smoke and mirrors. It's not actually stalled out there. What's happening is you took it out one, so it cooled off a little bit. You put it in butcher paper. The butcher paper is going to affect the way that the brisket is going to temp up. You just get it back in the smoker again. Remember, I'm running 300 degrees. It doesn't take long for that brisket to jump back into the 170s, the 180s. Now, remember I said, do not wait more than 20-minute increments to check it. And that's because if you think it's 167 and you're like, I'll throw a big log on, I'll come back in 45 minutes because my temp dropped. Don't do it. Worst case scenario. Once that puppy gets warm again, it's going to shoot off like a rocket. So every 20 minutes. My point in saying all this, don't let that fool you. It's still climbing temperatures. Continue on your 20-minute increments. Watch, I promise you, you're gonna come back and check it again, and it's gonna be bam, right back in the 175s. You're gonna go again, bam, in the 190s, and you're gonna be like, how the heck did that happen? We're cooking brisket. Are you enjoying it? Is this helpful? If it is, I won't ask, but you know what I want to ask. We are at a pivotal point in the cook, meaning we're at the end of the cook. It's great. 12 hours on the dot. Look at my fun-sized brisket. This is the first of 2 briskets. Brisket number 1, I've cooked all the way through with no wrap. So this brisket has temped all around. I went out to the smoker, I temped it was temping about 194 all around. Now, as you can see, my fatty is nice and soft. I could push my finger through if I wanted to. That bark is set beautifully. My lean is nice and tender. Little stiff on the lean, but that's okay, we'll take it. If you've watched my beef rib video, it's kind of the same approach where I take my bark further than done. I go to done and then I go done and some. So I overset my bark and then I back it off with tallow and foil. That's the same thing I do with my beef ribs. I'm gonna do that with this unwrapped brisket. I ran this brisket for 12 hours, no wrap. You saw the entire process. It's temping at about 194. Very briefly, I wanna talk about finishing brisket. We hear a lot, briskets are done at 203 degrees, and maybe that's the case today, and then tomorrow a brisket's done at 200 degrees. And then maybe the next day it's done at 194. When this brisket was on the pit, when I was hitting it with my Thermopin, everywhere I hit this, it felt tender. It felt perfect. Now, my Thermopin was reading 194-ish degrees. If I follow the book, I'd say, well, I need to roll this for another 8 degrees. I run the chance of overcooking my brisket. What's my point? You gotta go off feel, guys. You have to be able to chalk it up to, if I ruin this brisket, I ruined it in the effort to learn how briskets cook, to get better. You might ruin it, you might nail it. Tempt the brisket out first. If the probe is sliding through, I'm in the fatty. If the probe is sliding through, I'm not even pushing, guys. I literally, look. It's just sliding through. But it's temping 194, 198, 196, 200. It's all over the board there in the fatty. That's done. My brisket's temped. It's done. What's the next step? I'm gonna rest this brisket unwrapped in foil. This is 18-inch foil and I got a big slab here. Here in a little bit, I'm gonna talk about how to actually hold your briskets. I'm gonna show you a couple ways to hold your briskets. Right now, we're just talking pulling briskets and wrapping briskets. I just covered pulling an unwrapped brisket. You can pull it when it feels tender. You be the judge of that. 203 degrees is the universal number where we know it's tender, and it's universal. But if you really want to dial it in, the brisket's going to tell you when it's done. I deem this done somewhere around 194. Now to wrap this guy up, what I'm going to do is take a cup of beef tallow that I've rendered. And I'm going over. Same deal on the other side. I'm going back over the top. I'm going to turn it north-south and I'm going to repeat. And I'm going tight. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rest this brisket down at ambient room temperatures to 145 degrees internal. For my guys with all of the wizardry and the gadgets and the leave-ins, this is the big Frisbee approved time to stick your leave-in thermometer in if you just want to monitor how it's resting down. For me, I give it about 45 minutes, for now at ambient temperatures. Once it hits 145, I'll show you what I do to hold briskets. Next, we have to look at our wrap brisket. See you guys in a second. Let me pull it. We'll talk about that one. And then I'll show you how we hold both of them for the next 8 to 15 hours. As promised, we have our wrap brisket. At this point in the night, my friends, I feel like we went from potential strangers to acquaintances to friends to like battle buddies. It has been a long night for the best. Let's temp this brisket out. This is less than 90 seconds off the pit. We're gonna get the truest temperature. So remember I told you the two spots. We got where the point meets the flat, and then I think on this side, yep, we have right in the lean. So we'll just drop right in. 197. Where the point meets the flat. 199, 197, 199, somewhere in there. And then we'll go right in the lean. 198. Hook around, 200, 199. It's perfect. Okay, so that's good. This is the biggest question. It's not the biggest question. I've never been asked this question. I just made that up. This is a question. How do you know when the brisket is done? Is it best to go off of the universal 203 degrees, or is there a better way? There's a better way. We go for feel. Okay, so we have 3 checkpoints. We have the sides of the lean, we have the sides of the fatty, and we have underneath the brisket, under the lean, and I'll start with the lean. So this brisket's on the pit, and you're getting in the 4th quarter of the home stretch, and you're ready to pull it. You tempt it, and let's say the thermometer says 195. Now, let's say it says 195 on the thermopin, but you stick it in, you're like, man, that feels like butter. The initial inclination is to say, well, but the thermopin's not 203, I need to keep it longer. If you do that, that's a grave mistake. Because your brisket's gonna overcook, your fatty's gonna end up real grainy, and your lean's gonna end up dry. What we need to do is time 2 separate cuts of meat perfectly. The lean needs to be tender, yet moist, and the fatty needs to be fatty, yet tender, and also moist. You gotta time 2 different pieces of meat. The first check is a feel. I'm squeezing the sides. Now I'm giving a general amount of pressure. See how it gives? Right in the lean. We want that give. That feels good. It kind of talks back to us. You're like, hey, it's like, yo. It's not like, hey, it's not asleep. It's talking to us. That's what we want. The point should be even more so. Watch. You see that? This is like, hey, bro. You see that it's a little bit more intimate. This guy's like really talking back to you. That's 2 checks. Lean, talking to us. Fatty, it's kind of annoying us. We all know those people. Talk a little bit too much. This guy. All right. 3rd point. You can do this a couple different ways. I'm gonna feel underneath the first layer of butcher paper, and I'm feeling the lean first. What I wanna see is the lean tender, yet not too tender? Again, we have a layer of butcher paper, so I'm not gonna be able to push my finger all the way through, but that's not what you want. What you want is to feel tenderness, which I do, with a little bit of give in the lean. That way we know it's not overdone. It should retain its moisture. If I go to the fatty side, the fatty should talk to you more. That's even softer, even more tender. If you're still questioning, open the brisket up. We wrapped it this way on purpose. I have direct access to the bottom of the brisket. Now I could just validate everything that I just felt. My lean, and I'm just gonna tell you what I feel in real time. In real time, this feels a little bit firmer than where I'd want it. However, the fatty feels done. So in real time, the decision that I have to make is, do I leave this brisket on the pit and try to soften up my lean more? Or do I maximize what I think I have in my fatty? What I'm gonna do is just roll with it. We'll roll with it and we'll all learn together. But I think this lean will be done enough. I think it'll hold enough moisture to do what we want it to do. I'm just gonna let this come down to 145 degrees internal, and then I'm gonna show you how we hold this. Before we do that, I got one last little tip for you. The last step in my process is I saran wrap my briskets that are wrapped in butcher paper. This is cellophane. This is heat safe saran wrap. It's microwavable. It's not toxic. Normally what happens is that brisket in the butcher paper is going to continue to settle itself down, and then you lose some of that tallow, some of that fat, that juice, you lose it in the pan. The saran wrap actually allowed me to withhold this kind of like the foil wrap. And I realized that it's kind of a hybrid between butcher paper holds and foil wrap holds. You can kind of introduce saran wrap and you get the best of both worlds. So for better or for worse, here's how I saran wrap it. So I take one sliver of saran, I press the center so I don't lose any juice. Now the center is joined at the hip. And then kind of like our foil brisket, I just do this one as a safety measure. And I go over the top, and then I bring my sides up. All right, guys, let's talk about holding briskets and then let's all go to bed. As we round out the night, let's talk about one of the most important pieces to cooking brisket, and that's holding briskets. I have a long form video talking about the warmer that I purchased and why I purchased it and why I believe that warm long holds produce better brisket 100% of the time. So I won't dig into it on this video because I have one. What I'll say is I am a huge advocate for long holding briskets, which brings us to this topic. How do you long hold a brisket? Long holding briskets has to do with the apparatus in which you're holding the brisket and the temperature in which you pulled your brisket. Let's unpack that. So as you just saw, we wrapped 2 briskets. One brisket we wrapped in butcher paper, the other brisket we wrapped in foil, and we're gonna hold these like this. I pulled both of these briskets internal temp at all pressure points around 195 plus degrees. I deem these done first based on feel, second based on temperature. Now, let's talk about holding briskets not in a commercial warmer. For most of my barbecue life, I have held briskets in coolers. So I have experience long holding briskets in coolers, and I'll touch on that very briefly. We're gonna cook our briskets, finish our briskets, wrap them up, prepare them to hold, and we'll drop them in a cooler. And the fail-proof way to do this is first gauging how much time you wanna hold it for. That has to do with when you're gonna serve brisket, and you'll have to reverse engineer that. As a blanket statement, in a quality cooler, you can stretch it out and snag about 8 hours in a cooler. How do you do 8 hours? You get about a gallon of water or a pot of water. You bring the water to a boil. You pour the hot boiling water into your cooler, close it down, and you let that sit for about 15 to 20 minutes. That's called conditioning your cooler. You're heating the ambient environment within the cooler up to about the temperature of the boiling water. Once you've let that sit for about 20 minutes, you drain the water. Immediately follow that with your brisket into the cooler. Now, if I'm going into a commercial warmer, my warmer is set at 140 degrees. I will rest my briskets down to 145 degrees internal. I'll stick it in my warmer. It'll sit in there until you're ready to serve. I have held briskets out to 20 hours in my warmer. I've held them as short as 6 to 8 hours. That is a commercial warmer. Obviously, this isn't a commercial warmer. Why am I saying that? You can't rest your brisket down to 145 degrees internal. You have to rest it down to a higher temperature, if that makes sense. If you pull your brisket like this one, we pulled at 195-ish degrees, I'll likely rest this down to 170, put it in my conditioned cooler, and I can buy for sure 5 to 6 hours. If I know I need to stretch that out to 8 hours, what I'll do is I'll take a couple towels, I'll throw them in the dryer, I'll get them nice and hot, and I'll rest my brisket down to maybe 180 degrees, maybe 175 degrees. I'll take it, put it in the hot towels, wrap them up, and I'll put the brisket within the towels into the cooler. Why am I spending so much time on this? Because it's paramount, in my opinion, to produce quality brisket. When you long hold a brisket in a warm environment, what you're allowing that brisket to do is settle itself back in to the state that it wants to be. We have hammered these briskets for 12 plus hours. Extreme convection, extreme heat, extreme airflow. The brisket quality will increase the longer you allow it to settle down and breathe and relax, and the fat, the intermuscular fat and juices can kind of redistribute themselves out, figure out where they want to go. That jiggle that you see at the top barbecue joints at the serving table, they get that jiggle because they allow their briskets to rest in warm environments. So if you can, long hold your brisket in a warm environment, minimum 5 hours. Any cooler, from a Walmart cooler to a Yeti, any cooler you can snack 5 hours out of, I promise you, you will make better brisket. Let's round this video out for tonight, and we'll show up tomorrow and slice these bad boys. Today is the day that we've all been waiting for, and by we, I just mean my wife and I. We've cooked 2 briskets, as you know, and if you've made it to this part in the video, as I said earlier, you now qualify as family, because we have worked tirelessly to bring what I hope is one of the most informative how to smoke a brisket video on YouTube. Let me go into the warmer, let me pull a couple briskets, let's slice into it. At this point, I feel as though I have said everything that there is to be said. I've left no stone unturned. It is Sunday, God is good, and as the good Lord said, it is finished. Let me go grab the briskets. If you guys only knew the love, and I truly mean this, if you only knew the love and the passion that I have put in, not to just all of my briskets, but these 2 briskets, then I don't know then what, but just know I put a lot of love into these briskets and I'm excited to cut them open. Real quick, if you hot held your briskets in an oven or a Vever or commercial warmer or an electric smoker or something, if you hot held these about 1.5 hours to 2 hours before service, I'll bump my warmer temp up to about 155 degrees. And what that will do is just slowly start to wake up the intermuscular fat. It'll help the brisket kind of redistribute the fat as it thins that fat out just a little bit inside. And then it also makes for, I think 155 degrees makes for the perfect bite from a warmth perspective on the tongue. So I like to serve brisket at 155 degrees. For giggles, let's tempt this and see where it's holding internally. 152 degrees, imagine that. It's been sitting on the countertop for about 5 or 10 minutes. So this has been holding at exactly 155, which is perfect serving temps. Enough talk, let's check it out. Just a thing of beauty. Look at that, jiggle. This, my friends, is the brisket that we all chase. This is the no wrap brisket. We ran this brisket for 12 hours almost on the dot, totally unwrapped. The only thing we did was added our foil caps and a blocking log, and we ran it the entire time unwrapped, and I couldn't be happier with the product. When you leave a brisket unwrapped when you're cooking, you get an exceptionally dark, rich black bark. This bark is truly black with a shade of a deep red mahogany. You can barely see it. That beef tallow has had a chance to absorb into the brisket. It's softened up our bark just a little bit. That's what we want. Let's cut it. Look at that. Look at that, drippy, drippy, drippy. Let's slice it up, huh? My goodness. I have sliced our fatty up, and this is the final product. Okay, let's talk about this real quick. Let me show you what I'm looking for. Our fat cap. This was our fat cap. It's a perfect caramel texture, dark in color. Our pepper, our salt, and our brisket booster has recessed itself into the lining of the fat, creating the bark that we want. When someone eats that, that is going to be like brisket candy, barbecue goodness. That is going to be an undeniable bite when they eat that. And again, guys, let me say this. While you rest your briskets, if you hot hold them, the longer you hot hold your brisket, the faster it's gonna oxidize once you cut it. When I serve brisket for the 4th, I normally hold them close to 17 hours. I've gone as long as 20. I've literally watched it oxidize on my chopping block. So if you're hot holding brisket, there is a kind of diminishing returns with holding it. The product does get better the longer you hold it. A 20-hour held brisket, in my opinion, is better than a 5-hour held brisket, but the second you slice it, oxidation begins. Now, this isn't me showing off, guys. This is me hopefully getting you excited to cook brisket. We got the wiggle that we're looking for. And something that drives me insane is when I see people say, it passed the bend test, it passed the pull test. If you cook it, any piece of meat long enough, it's going to get tender. What makes a difference is, how did you render that intermuscular fat? Did the fat render how you want it? Is your fat cap yellow and gross, or is it caramel, and pillowy? So that's what we're looking for. And I'm just taking you guys, look, this would be called a burnt in. Look at that, guys. People say that this might be the best bite in barbecue. Again, if you've seen the channel before, then you know I always say the best bite of barbecue is just simply your next bite of barbecue. That is a beautiful brisket. Have you seen enough? Okay, taste test time. I am beyond excited. As promised, I'm just going to bite in to the other end of my point. And this is just outrageous, and I love everything about it. Oh, man. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. That's so, it is actually truly so good. Part of what I'm feeling internally, these emotions, is just, it's the cook. When you barbecue the way that I just taught you, you are one with your meat. Gosh, that doesn't sound right, but we're going to keep it. You're one with your barbecue. This, it's like you have a certain, I don't know how to explain it, guys. There's a certain connection you have with this. That honestly might have been the best, one of the best bites of barbecue I've ever had, because I caught nearly 360 degrees of delicious bark on the end of a point with a ton of intermuscular fat. The brisket booster is just jumping off my taste buds. Yes! I saved a little burnt end. Look at the burnt end. Oh, yes. Look at that bark. First, one for Mrs. Meet and Greet. There you go, my love.
Delicious.
Uh-huh. You guys should see the smile on her face. Barbecue puts a smile that's undeniable. One for the mister. Come on, man. Come on. You guys got to do this. And before we slice into our butcher paper brisket, I just want to do the obligatory kind of mid brisket slice. We'll just cut right into it. Oh, yeah. You can't go wrong with that, guys. All right. We'll slice the lean ever so slightly. And we got our lean. It'll check the box. Lean's good, tender, fat cap's rendered. Again, this is a choice brisket, so the lean's not just chock full of intermuscular fat, but that's why we call it the lean. Very delicious piece of meat. That's freaking good. This brisket just feels perfect. Look at that butcher paper, soaked in natural tallow. Not too much tallow where I'm gonna wash my bark out, but just enough tallow to keep this nice and moist. Let's check this out. Oh yeah. We got the same thing going on, guys. Without further ado, let's slice the wrapped brisket. That's what you want. Jiggly jiggly. Oh yeah. I'm gonna take this massive end piece. For the love of barbecue, guys. This is one of the most flavorful batch of briskets I have ever made. The bark on these briskets, perfect. Nice fat cap rendered down just how you want. This is barbecue candy. Guys, I have nothing else to say to you other than this. I hope you enjoyed this video. All I wanted to do is leave no stone unturned. All I wanted to do is drop as many barbecue gems as I could in relation to cooking brisket. If it's your first time cooking a brisket, my brother, you got this. You will crush your brisket. If it's your 1 millionth time cooking brisket, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of entertainment and a little bit of barbecue content. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. Other than that, big frizz, meet and greet. As always, guys, over and out.